Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. Today we are discussing the hopes in Middle East and the peace process and the people who are suffering in Middle East. We'll try to discuss them, and we'll also focus on some solutions that will probably benefit the current conditions of people of Middle East. And today to discuss Middle East, I have an expert who has joined me from Canada. He's an author and a journalist. His name, Mr. Robert Fantina. Thank you, Mr. Robert Fantina.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you.
We Pakistani really appreciate your effort for peace and the social justice you're doing, and especially your efforts to highlight the atrocities of Israeli state and Middle East.
Thank you. Yes, it is. The atrocities that Israel has been committing for generations must stop.
Yes, it must stop. It is all inhuman activities that are going on in Middle East. Middle East, as audience, as we all know, and we have the realization that Middle East is suffering since decades. It's not.
Yes.
It's not a matter of this decade, but Middle East is suffering since Israel emerged as in a result of a malfunctioned contracts.
Yes, since
Today,
1948.
today my first question would be, in what environment Middle East will work when this pandemic will over?
For the Middle East to work, to be a functioning area with independent and prosperous countries following the pandemic, there are a couple of things that need to happen. One is the United States must cease all involvement in the Middle East. The United States must have nothing to do with that area of the country. Some trade possibly, but as far as any political solutions, the United States is not an honest broker. The United States does not support human rights or international law. So the United States must be completely absent from it. Secondly, the United Nations must enforce the many resolutions that it has issued regarding the Middle East. I'm thinking specifically of Israel and Palestine, but there are many others also. So they must be enforced. And third, and which is related to number two, is the international community independently must issue sanctions against countries that are perpetuating these atrocities. Not only Israel, but also Saudi Arabia, which is massacring innocent people in Yemen on a daily basis, causing widespread starvation and suffering there. So the international community must stop trading with these criminal countries, issue sanctions against them. That is the only way that they will be forced to adhere to international law.
Thank you. The sanctions are also an American tool to counter these countries. But do you really think international organizations are in this position after hitting this pandemic that they won't be able to do anything in Middle East?
They might use the recovery from the pandemic as an excuse, but it's not a valid excuse because for generations they've ignored the situations in the Middle East. They have continued trading with Israel, with Saudi Arabia and other criminal countries. They have established diplomatic ties with them. There is no reason for them to do this. These countries that do that are simply hypocritically violating international law. So the pandemic might be used as an excuse, but the pandemic will not last forever. And once it ends, then the countries must finally step up and take principled stands for human rights.
Thank you. Moving towards my second question, that is also about the international relations that Middle East has stuck into. That is U.S. and China rivalry. How will you see
Yes.
the challenging matter for Middle Eastern countries to sustain in this environment?
The rivalry between the United States and China, which has been escalated and worsened by US President Donald Trump, can only actually be a good thing for the Middle East, because as US power wanes in that area and throughout the world, because its influence is is so far diminished under Trump, then China, which certainly has problems, issues of its own, but has a more even-handed attitude and way of dealing with the Middle East, will become stronger. And that can only be good for Middle Eastern countries that are suffering under oppression.
Thank you. But mostly in these all circumstances, uh, how you're thinking the people, is there any chance, is there any hope that the suffering for the people of Middle East will be over, and everything will they can go back to their life in near future?
Some of them haven't had a life to go back to, such as the people of Palestine. Some are still, elderly people did have a life previously, but most of Palestinians have grown up under brutal occupation. There are other countries, of course, that are suffering from the pandemic and the economic slowdown from that. They will be able to return to normal. But for the people of Yemen, the people of Palestine, and many others, the suffering will continue unless and until the international community acts. Now, people in these countries are very resilient. They have stood up against their oppressors, for some of them for decades and decades. They will continue to do so, but they cannot do it alone. And in order for them to have hope of a better future, the rest of the world must act.
Thank you. And lastly, my question would be regarding the Middle East plan of America's Middle East plan that Trump bought in January, and resultantly in that, America is supporting Israel's claim on West Bank, and they are actually supporting the annexation of West Bank area. So here the question comes, because the polls, the point of worry for me is the polls that are in very much favor of Joe Biden. The presidential election polls are very much in favor of Joe Biden. So how you think, if Joe Biden wins, what would happen to this Middle East peace process?
I don't think anything good will happen. Joe Biden is a ardent Zionist. He supports Netanyahu. He supports the Israeli position. The peace plan put forward by Donald Trump gives everything to Israel that it wants. It divides Palestine into separate individual entities controlled by Israel. It requires accomplishments for Palestine to achieve within 5 years that the U.S. demands of no other allies. So there is the peace plan, which has been rejected by the Palestinians and by most of the world, is a farce. It's simply so that Trump can say he brokered peace and the Palestinians refuse to abide by it. That is just one of his many, many lies. Biden has been totally supportive of Israel. The Democratic Party platform does not mention occupation. It does not mention international rights, doesn't mention human rights for the Palestinians. Some Democratic officials have said that the idea of tying U.S. foreign aid to Israeli adherence to international law would only destabilize the area, which makes absolutely no sense. But these are people who are beholden to pro-Israel lobbies in the United States, which are very powerful. Although it's important to note that their power is fading. A few years ago, there was no difference between the Republican position on Israel and the Democratic position. That has changed drastically in the last few years. So while a Biden presidency will not usher in anything positive for the Palestinians immediately, having the Democrats in power is a good sign, because more and more progressive Democrats are being elected and they're speaking up for the Palestinians.
Thank you. From this question, sorry, I am asking another because it was my last question. I apologize for asking another. It is regarding the false flag operations. We have seen in American history that they have used false flag operations to invade in countries. So do you think there could be another false flag operation, because people are calling this Beirut blast as a false flag operation? The theory is establishing because they want to attack Iran. So what do you think in this situation? Is there possibility that in later on the investigation, the Beirut blast could be categorized in a false flag operation? And how far it will impact the Middle East situation?
It's very possible that the US will use this as a false flag. My most recent book talks about false flags. That's the whole topic of it. The, the explosion in Beirut, which government officials in Beirut say was due to uh, a ship that had been docked for some time and finally blew up because of what it was carrying. But if the US can say that Iran was in any way involved in that, then the US would say that it needs to invade Iran to stabilize the Middle East. Now, this is the height of hypocrisy. The US is trying now to extend an arms embargo against Iran that is scheduled to expire in October. And US officials are saying that Iran is the greatest sponsor of terrorism in the world. That is a nonsensical statement. The United States is the greatest sponsor of terrorism in the world. The United States is the country that has been at war for over 220 years of its existence. It's currently bombing several countries throughout the Middle East. It's issued and maintaining brutal sanctions against Iran and Venezuela. Iranian officials have called that economic terrorism, which is exactly what it is. But if the United States government, under the unstable and erratic presidency of Donald Trump, can figure out a way to blame Iran for this tragedy in Beirut, then it will do so and use it to possibly start another war.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Robert. It was it's a pleasure talking to you, and it is an honor for me to have you at my platform. And audience, Middle East has been under so much pressure, so much stress since decades. Now it has to be stopped. The persecutions must stop, and for that, US must understand this thing. They have to let the people live at their own terms. If they are truly supporting democracies, let the people live at their own. Let the countries decide their fate. So this is the most important thing that United States and the world power must realize, because United States is no more in a position to lead this world, to call themselves as the only global power in this planet. It is a statement that nobody will support at this moment. Thank you, Mr. Robert. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz. Take care.